Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm proud to be joined by three of my colleagues, all of whom have been active on the issue that we are talking about today, Senators Nelson and Senators Klobuchar and Senator Murphy. Now, earlier this morning, Senator Nelson and I met with a group of survivors from Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. The students are amazing. They are passionate, they are brave, they're committed, and they are organized. This is not a temporary thing for them. They're going all out to help make America safer. We in Congress, Democrats and Republicans, owe it to these students to act, and act in a real and significant way. Their friends who were gunned down in Parkland were beginning to plan their adult lives. They were gunned down at the age when there's so much expectation and so much ahead of them. They were thinking of which colleges to apply to. They were beginning to drive. They had everything in front of them, and they're gone. After the meeting, I couldn't help but think of other meetings I have had, year after year. I still have pictures on my desk of some of the young children who were shot in Connecticut. I remember the young people who survived the shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. And I remember in New York State, parents coming to me and talking about gun violence and their young sons and daughters in the bloom of life, having it snuffed out. So the bottom line is this has to end. All of it. It has to end. We in Congress have an obligation to pass meaningful gun safety legislation that will save lives and tackle as many of the loopholes and problems with our gun laws as we can, not just one narrow tweak at the margins. Senator Cornyn and Senator Murphy's proposal is a modest step designed to address one component of gun safety. I support it. But if that is all Congress does, we won't have done our job to keep America's families safe. We won't have kept our promise to these kids I met today who think that this bill is fine, but certainly not enough. We will not have kept our promise to the American people to clean up gun violence once and for all. The bill that was designed for one specific problem, and that was the problem in Texas at Sutherland Springs when someone who was in the Air Force's record wasn't reported to NICS. We should not design a bill for one particular problem, but we should design a bill that will help reduce the chances of all future gun shootings. And that means dealing with all of the loopholes that we have talked about. We Democrats, at a minimum, believe we should be passing a universal background check legislation that assures that guns don't fall into the wrong hands. 90% of the American people are with us. The kids from Parkland are with us. We Democrats have a number of other proposals that ought to be debated and voted in the Senate. Rather than just passing one narrow bill and moving on, we Democrats intend to push our Republican colleagues to have a real debate on gun safety and pass meaningful measures that will address the wide range of problems that have led to an epidemic of mass shootings in our country. We hope, for the sake of millions of the kids who attend school every day, that our Republican colleagues will buck the NRA and do the right thing. You can't solve this problem and please the NRA, and our Republican colleagues have to learn that. The American people already have, and the kids at Parkland already have. Senator Nelson.
Think about it. Just in the last 2 years in Florida, look at the 3 massacres that we've had. The Pulse nightclub in Orlando, the Fort Lauderdale airport shooting, and now Parkland. For those who any kind of restriction on a gun You're talking to somebody who grew up on a ranch, who has always had guns, who's hunted all my life, who still hunts with my son. And yet, an AR-15 in Parkland and a Sig Sauer MCX in Orlando, those are not for hunting. They're for killing. So as we come into this with the NRA obviously opposed, what's our most obvious possibility of compromise and of finding a solution? And it's what the leader has suggested: universal background checks. Not to take a single part of an Air Force military person who has been a domestic abuser, and that didn't get reported to NICS, which it certainly should have, and would be part of universal background checks, but so would all the criminal records and the mental instabilities and all the things that fell through the cracks down in Parkland. That would be caught in universal background checks. It also would have caught Omar Mateen, because he had been on the terrorist watch list and had been taken off of it, and that would have been a double check to go back and check him before he slaughtered 49 people. So I agree with the leader. We don't want some eyewash. We don't want some window dressing. We want to move to substantial accomplishment to get at this problem so that Parkland won't be one of the worst massacres, that it would be the last massacre.
Well said. Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you. So I come at this issue because of my old job when I was a prosecutor, and law enforcement asked me to get involved in it. And when I think of those 17 victims in Senator Nelson's state, many of them were too young to have even gone to their first senior dance. They were too young to drive. They were too young to vote. And right now their classmates are standing up for them. They're going to vote for them, and they're going to speak for them. And to me, this is a tipping point like we've never seen. I know it's a tipping point because I was in northern Minnesota on Friday, and after we talked about curling, we're proud of our team, we focused on this issue. Not in my speech, it was about other issues, economic issues up there, but when I walked out, two people came out with me. One said his daughter had been murdered in Colorado by a gun and that he had never had the courage to talk about it to his fellow hunters up there in northern Minnesota, and now he was. And the second owned a driving range, and he told me he was ready to do something on bump stocks and some other things. Not clear, but he felt we had to do something. That is what we're dealing with right now. There is a change in this country. So for me, that universal background check bill is one that was my worst day in Washington when that went down, because I had the constituents from Chris's state, from Sandy Hook, those parents in my office, and we had to tell them we didn't have enough votes to pass it. And here they had been there knowing this might not have saved their babies. That bill, by the way, states that have those kind of background checks, 38% less women get killed from domestic violence homicides, much less suicides in those states that have them. So that is very important, not just for these massacres, but also for that everyday violence. And when I mean everyday violence, I'm talking about 6,000 women who were killed by their partners in 10 years. That is a greater number than we had troops, soldiers killed in Iraq and Afghanistan. So if we can do that, or perhaps the bill that Debbie Dingell and I, it's bipartisan in the House, have to make sure that we include dating partners in the definition of the federal law for domestic violence and do something about stalking convictions, those things will make a difference too. So I just want to thank my colleagues, and I'm just hoping that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle see this as the opportunity it is to finally move on something that will make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Senator Schumer. Parkland is going to discover that there is no recovery. from something like this. Sandy Hook will never, ever be the same place that it was before all those little children were erased from the earth in a hail of bullets lasting under 5 minutes. And as I've reminded my colleagues many times, this epidemic only exists in the United States. We average greater than 1 mass shooting per day. We've been averaging a school shooting every 3 to 4 days just this year. And it is all on us, because it is only public policy that can solve this. Bill mentioned what has happened in Florida, Fort Lauderdale, Orlando, and now Parkland. It is not a coincidence that the governor of Florida and the Republican legislature has been giving the NRA and the gun lobby everything they want over the course of the last 8 years. It is also not a coincidence that in my state, a state that has passed common sense gun safety legislation, Sandy Hook, we have seen a 40% reduction in gun homicides. States that do the bidding of the NRA have higher gun homicide rates. States that pass smart common sense legislation can make a difference. We should follow that example here. If we were to only debate the Fix-Nix Act, we would be slamming the door in the face of all of these kids who are demanding change. Let's be clear. The American public has hit a turning point. They are not going to accept incremental change. They are not going to accept inaction. They are not going to accept Congress stopping a full debate on common sense gun violence legislation. So what we're asking for is to bring a series of measures that will make a difference before the Senate. Let's let the Senate do its work. Let's debate measures like background checks. I know this might be scary for some Republicans because they are seeing votes change in real time. We have Republicans expressing support for some of these measures that never expressed support before. That begs us to have a debate on the floor so that we can find out what measures can pass and what measures cannot pass. I was encouraged that Senator Cornyn mentioned the ability to come up with a series of measures to debate on the floor. I think it's imperative that we rise to the moment that the public is demanding and have a full debate on addressing gun violence on the floor of the Senate in the coming weeks.
Ready for your questions.
When you met with those students, what did you tell them you thought the most realistic?
We all agreed that comprehensive, universal, the kids call it universal. They don't want to call it comprehensive because they think some people are trying to subvert broad universal background checks with the word comprehensive. So they said universal background checks is number one. We agree.
Republican leaders say Democrats are holding out this.
That's not true.
Do you object to beginning debate?
We want to begin debate. It was a Republican who made it public who held up the bill, the Fix-Nix bill that they want to do yesterday. The Democrats did not. But what we are asking for and are going to make every effort to get is the full debate that you just mentioned. We want full debate, not just on Fix-Nix, but on legislation that would really do the job. The students say Fix-Nix is not enough. The American people say Fix-Nix is not enough. Its own sponsor, who's done a great job on so many of these issues, says it's not enough. We need full debate, and I just want to add to what Chris said. I was gratified to hear that Senator Cornyn said, let's debate these issues. I'd like to hear Senator McConnell say that as well, because we have a moral imperative to finally act, and act in a real way. Not just a little wink at the NRA, oh, we're acting like we're doing something.
Some of these, the corporate world is waiting on this, Delta and some of the other firms as well. There's some who now who support the NRA who are saying they should take back tax breaks, sort of retribution for them.
Yeah.
Fuel tax for Delta and Georgia. What do you think?
Look, if you look at the data, the people of Georgia want much more on gun legislation. Even in the reddest of states, universal background checks has overwhelming support. The legislature there, like legislatures in Florida and elsewhere, at least on the Republican side, seem to be in the grip lock of the NRA, but the NRA does not represent the vast majority of the American people on this issue, unfortunately for them.
Can I just add one
Go ahead,
thing?
please,
Companies reflect their employees. Companies reflect their customers. And that's what we saw in protecting gay rights when companies came out on front of that. And they are representing, they have made a decision that it's best for their company. They don't make just decisions because they think it's a good thing to do that day. They did it because they care about their customers and they care about their employees, and that's where they are on this. And so it's no surprise because we've seen this exact same thing happen before. When social change starts moving, you'll also have businesses start moving.
Look, I want to discuss this with Senator McConnell, but we want to debate, and we want to debate on more than fix NICS.
In addition to universal background checks, what are your top priorities?
Well, we are looking at a lot of different things. We're not taking anything off the table, but we Democrats will have a list of things that we think need to be done.
Can you say what it is?
No.
Reverend Graham lying in honor. Comment on Reverend Graham lying in honor tomorrow.
Well, you know, he was a real leader and a very wonderful man, and he deserves the respect of the American people. Yes.
Have you been encouraged by some of President Trump's comments talking about things like strong
Well, until President Trump puts to paper what he really wants, you never really know what he really wants, as we have learned that hard lesson over and over again. So I'm not yet encouraged. If he comes out with something specific that actually moves things forward, comprehensive background checks, he said, we want universal. We'll see if we mean the same thing. But if he did, that would be great. Thank you, everybody.